I didn't inherit just land. I inherited responsibility. That's what my father used to say every time we drove down that long, dusty road cutting through our property. It wasn't much to look at, just a narrow strip of packed dirt stretching between fields of wheat and old fence lines. But to us, it was everything. That road was the lifeline of our farm. Without it, nothing moved in or out. And more importantly, it was ours. Our family had owned this land for over 50 years. My grandfather bought it when it was nothing but wild grass and uneven soil. He cleared it with his own hands, built the first barn, dug the irrigation lines, and carved that road himself, straight for the county access point all the way to the heart of the farm. Every generation added something. My father expanded the fields, reinforced the road, and made sure it held up through floods, storms, and years of heavy equipment grinding it down. And when he passed it on to me, he made one thing clear. Protect what's yours, because people will try to take it. At the time, I thought he was just being cautious, maybe even a little old-fashioned. I didn't realize how right he was. For most of my life, things were simple, quiet, predictable. Mornings started before sunrise. I'd step outside with a cup of coffee, the air still cool, the sky just beginning to lighten over the fields. You could hear everything out there. The wind brushing against the crops, the distant hum of machinery, birds waking up in the trees lining the road. That road, I drove it every single day. Tractor, truck, sometimes just on foot. It connected everything. The house, the barns, the storage silos, the back acreage. Every delivery came through it. Every harvest left through it. There was no backup, no alternate route, just that one road. And for decades, it was never a problem. Until they showed up. It started with construction noise. At first, I didn't think much of it. Land around here gets bought and sold all the time. People build, tear down, move on. It's nothing unusual, but this time felt different. The property next to mine had been empty for years, just overgrown brush and an old broken fence that no one bothered fixing. Then one morning, out of nowhere, trucks rolled in. Big ones, followed by equipment, workers, and survey crews. Within weeks, the entire place transformed. They cleared everything, leveled the ground, put up fencing, clean, expensive-looking fencing that didn't belong in farmland like this. Then came the house. Not just a house, a statement. 2 stories, modern design, glass, steel, perfectly landscaped edges. It stood out like it had been dropped there from another world. You could see it clearly from parts of my land, especially near the road. That's when I first met them, the neighbors. I remember the day clearly. I was driving back from town, coming down the road like always, when I saw a black SUV parked off to the side, half on my land, half near the property line. A man stood next to it, talking on his phone, dressed like he had just stepped out of a business meeting instead of a construction site. He noticed me as I slowed down, held up a hand, stopped me. I rolled down the window, not thinking much of it. "Hey," he said, like we already knew each other. "You live out here?" I nodded. "Yeah, this road leads to my place." He glanced behind me, then down the stretch of land. "Oh," he said, "didn't realize this was a private access road." That caught my attention. It is, I said, always has been. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people give when they think they know something you don't. "Well," he replied, "we'll have to look into that." I didn't like the way he said it. Not one bit. Still, I kept things polite. Told him welcome to the area. Asked if they needed anything. He gave short answers, distracted, like he wasn't really interested in being neighbors, just observing. Me, the land, the road. A few days later, I saw survey flags. Bright orange markers stuck into the ground near the edge of the road. At first, just a few, then more, lining sections of land that had never been questioned before. I stopped the truck and got out. Walked along the road, following the markers. They weren't random. They were placed with purpose, tracing lines that felt wrong. Too close to the center of the road. Too close to my side. That uneasy feeling started creeping in. I pulled one of the flags out of the ground and looked at it. Fresh. Recently placed. Someone had been measuring. And not just their land. That same afternoon, I drove over to their property. This time, I didn't wait to be flagged down. I found a man again, standing near a group of workers, pointing at something on a clipboard. When he saw me approaching, His expression didn't change. No surprise, no curiosity, just that same calm, controlled look. "We need to talk," I said. He dismissed the workers with a small gesture, then turned to me. "About the road," I added. He nodded slightly, like he had been expecting this. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you'd come by." I crossed my arms. "Those markers, they're too far over. That road's been mine for decades." He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just glanced toward the road in the distance. "According to what we're seeing," he said slowly, "that might not be entirely accurate." I felt something tighten in my chest. "That road was built by my grandfather," I said firmly. "We've maintained it ever since. There's no question about it." Again, that smile. "We'll see," he replied. That was it. No explanation, no discussion, just those two words. I stood there for a moment, waiting for more, but nothing came. He turned away, already calling one of his workers back over, like the conversation was finished. Like I didn't matter. Like this was already decided. I drove back down that road slower than usual. Every bump, every turn, every inch of it suddenly felt different. Not because it had changed, but because someone else was looking at it now, claiming it. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder if that warning my father gave me wasn't just advice, but a promise of what was coming. Because those flags, they weren't just markers. They were the beginning of something. Something that was about to turn my quiet, predictable life into a fight I never saw coming. And standing there at the end of that road, looking back at those bright orange flags cutting across land that had always been mine, I realized one thing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a move, and I had a feeling it wasn't their last. The next morning, the flags were still there. I don't know why, but part of me expected them to be gone, like maybe it had all been some kind of mistake. A bad measurement, a temporary survey that would be corrected once someone double-checked the lines. But no, if anything, there were more. They stretched farther along the road now, spaced out with careful precision. Bright orange against the dirt, impossible to ignore. And the way they curved slightly inward, it didn't sit right with me. It felt like someone was slowly drawing a new boundary, and I didn't like where that line was going. I parked the truck and stepped out again, boots crunching softly against the gravel. The morning was quiet, same as always, but it didn't feel the same anymore. That peaceful silence had been replaced with something else. Tension. I crouched down near one of the flags, studying its position more carefully this time. It wasn't just close to the road. It was cutting into it, not by inches, by feet. I straightened up slowly, looking down the full stretch of the road. If those markers were right, if that line held, then a good portion of the road didn't belong to me anymore. Which made no sense. None at all. I'd driven this road my entire life. Maintained it, repaired it, paid for every load of gravel that had ever been spread across it. There wasn't a single doubt in my mind about where it sat. But doubt wasn't the problem. These people weren't guessing. They were acting, and that meant they believed something, or at least wanted me to believe it. By mid-morning, the workers were back. This time, they weren't just measuring. They were building. Fence posts, fresh wood, evenly spaced, driven straight into the ground along the flagged line. I watched from a distance at first, leaning against the truck, arms crossed tight as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. They weren't hesitating. No checking, no confirming, just moving forward, like everything had already been decided. I didn't stay quiet this time. I walked straight over. "Hey," I called out, my voice cutting through the hum of their equipment. A couple of the workers paused, glancing at each other before one of them stepped forward. Younger guy, probably just doing what he was told. "You can't put those there," I said, pointing at the posts. He shifted uncomfortably. "We're just following instructions, sir." "Yeah? Then go get the guy giving them." He didn't argue, just nodded and turned back toward the house. A few minutes later, the neighbor came out. Same calm expression, same measured steps, like he had all the time in the world, and I didn't. "What's the issue?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew. I gestured toward the posts. "The issue is you're building on my road." He glanced at them briefly, then back at me. "Our survey says otherwise." "There's no way your survey is right," I shot back. "That road's been here longer than that house of yours." "That doesn't make it yours," he replied. The way he said it, flat, confident, it hit harder than I expected. I took a step closer. Listen carefully. That road is the only access to my property. You don't get to just take it. He didn't flinch. We're not taking anything, he said. We're establishing boundaries. By cutting into the middle of my road, if the road crosses into our property, he said calmly, then yes. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was arrogance or strategy. Maybe both. Look, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. If there's some kind of misunderstanding, we can sort it out. But you don't start putting up fences before that happens. He tilted his head slightly. Or what? He asked. That question hung in the air longer than it should have. Not loud, not aggressive, just challenging. I clenched my jaw. Were you going to have a problem? I said. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gave a small shrug. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it comes. And just like that, he turned his back on me again. Conversation over. Like it didn't matter what I said. Like he'd already won. I stood there, watching as the workers picked up right where they left off, driving post after post into the ground, each one pushing that invisible line deeper into my land. Or at least what I knew was my land. I didn't stay. There was no point arguing with hired workers, and clearly, the neighbor wasn't interested in anything short of a full confrontation. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the house and started digging, not on the ground, in the past. I pulled out every document I had, old folders, worn envelopes, records my father kept stored away in a cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. Deeds, maps, tax records, anything that mentioned the property lines or that road. Hours passed without me noticing. Papers spread across the table, some so old the edges had yellowed and curled. Handwritten notes from my grandfather. Survey sketches that looked nothing like the clean digital prints people use now. But one thing was clear in all of them. That road was there. Marked, referenced, maintained, ours. Still, something bothered me. Because if it was that simple, it wouldn't be pushing this hard. People like them didn't move without something backing them up. Which meant either they were bluffing, or they had something I didn't know about. By late afternoon, I stepped outside again. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the land. From where I stood, I could see the road stretching out in front of me, and the changes were impossible to miss. The posts were in place, a rough line forming along one side. Not complete yet, but enough to send a message. I walked down to it slowly, ran my hand along one of the posts. Solid, deep. They weren't planning to take this down. This was just the beginning. And then I saw something else. Further down the road, something that hadn't been there before. Metal, a chain, not fully stretched yet, just lying coiled near two posts like it was waiting to be pulled tight. Next to it, a sign, still leaning against the ground. White background, bold black letters. Even from a distance, I could read it. Private property. I stopped walking. Didn't need to get any closer. Didn't need to read the rest. Because in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't about confusion. It wasn't about a bad survey. And it definitely wasn't about working things out. This was a move. Planned, deliberate, and almost finished. I stood there, staring at that chain, that sign, that line they were drawing right through the middle of my life. And I felt something shift. Because up until now, I've been trying to understand what they were doing. Trying to stay reasonable. Trying to keep things calm. But they weren't playing that kind of game. They were taking, piece by piece, step by step. And if I didn't stop it, that road would be gone. Not later. Not someday. Soon. I turned back toward the house, my mind already racing through what came next. Because one thing was certain now, they weren't going to stop. And neither was I. Not anymore. I knew it before I even reached the turn. That feeling hit me halfway down the path from the house. The kind that settles in your chest without warning. Heavy. Certain. Like your gut is trying to tell you something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Something was wrong. I picked up speed, boots hitting the ground harder with each step as the road came into view. And then I saw it. They didn't wait. They didn't hesitate. They finished it. The chain was up, pulled tight across the road, locked in place between two thick steel posts that hadn't been there yesterday. It cut straight across the center, blocking everything, truck, tractor, even foot traffic unless you wanted to climb over like you didn't belong there. And that sign, it wasn't leaning anymore. It stood upright now, bolted into the ground right beside the chain. Private property, no trespassing. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, not moving, not thinking, just staring. Because there's a difference between something being threatened and something being taken. And right then, it was gone. My road. The same stretch of dirt I'd driven since I was a kid, the same road my father maintained, the same one my grandfather carved out of raw land, was now blocked. Like I didn't exist. Like none of it ever belonged to us. I walked forward slowly, each step heavier than the last, until I was standing right in front of that chain. Close enough to see the fresh scratches on the metal, the shine of a brand new lock holding in place. I reached out and grabbed it. Cold, solid, real. I gave a hard shake. It didn't budge. Of course it didn't. They didn't do this halfway. Behind me, I heard the low hum of an engine. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The black SUV rolled up slowly and came to a stop a few yards back. The engine idled for a second before shutting off, and then the door opened. Footsteps. Calm. Unhurried. I let go of the chain, but didn't step back. "You're trespassing." His voice came from behind me, steady, controlled, like he was reading off something rehearsed. I turned slowly. "You got a lot of nerve," I said. He didn't react. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me like this was nothing more than a routine conversation. "This is private property now," he continued. "You'll need to find another access point." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Another access point?" I repeated. "There is no other access point. You know that." He shrugged slightly. "That's not my problem." For a second, I just looked at him, tried to figure out how someone could say something like that so easily, so casually. "You blocked the only road to my farm," I said, my voice tightening. "That makes it your problem." "No," he replied. "It makes it a legal matter." There it was. That word again. Legal. Like he'd been waiting to use it. "You think putting up a chain makes it yours?" I asked. "No," he said calmly. "The paperwork does." I stepped closer. "Then show me," I said. "Right now." He didn't move. Didn't reach for anything. Didn't even pretend to consider it. "You'll see it when you need to," he replied. That calm tone, it was starting to get under my skin more than anything else. Because it wasn't uncertainty. It was confidence. The kind of confidence people only have when they think they're untouchable. "You've got workers driving through here," I said, gesturing toward the road behind Shane. "You've got equipment moving in and out. And you're telling me I can't use the same road I've used my whole life." He nodded once. "That's correct." I clenched my fists. "You're making a mistake." For the first time, something flickered across his expression. Not fear. Not concern. Amusement. "I don't think so," he said. That did it. I turned back to the chain and grabbed it again, this time pulling harder, testing it, looking for any weakness. Nothing. Solid steel. Deep set posts. Locked tight. They had planned this. Every part of it. "Go ahead," he said from behind me. "Keep pulling. It's not going anywhere." I let go slowly. Took a step back. My mind was racing now, not just with anger, but with everything this meant. No road meant no deliveries. No deliveries meant no supplies. No supplies meant no work getting done the way it needed to. And worse, harvest season wasn't far off. If I couldn't move equipment in and out properly, if trucks couldn't reach the fields, it wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would cost me. A lot. "You really think this holds up?" I asked, turning back to him. "I know it does," he replied. "And if it doesn't?" He smiled again, that same quiet, confident smile. "Then you can take it to court." There it was. The challenge. Clear as day. He wasn't just blocking the road. He was daring me to fight him over it. And, judging by the way he stood there, completely unbothered, he thought I'd lose. I took a slow breath. Tried to steady myself. Because losing my temper right now wouldn't fix anything. It would just play into whatever game he was running. But that didn't mean I was going to walk away quietly. "This isn't over," I said. He tilted his head slightly. "It already is," he replied. I stared at him for a second longer. Then I turned and walked back down the road. Not because I was backing down. Not because I didn't have more to say. But because right then, I realized something important. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a fight. And fights like this, they weren't one standing in the dirt arguing over a chain. They were one somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. somewhere with records, proof, and things people like him relied on. Because if he was this confident, then he believed he had something solid behind him, and I needed to find out exactly what that was. By the time I reached the house, the anger had settled into something colder, sharper, more focused. I walked inside, went straight to the table where all the old documents were still spread out, and started going through them again. Slower this time, more carefully, because I wasn't just looking for confirmation anymore. I was looking for something he didn't expect me to find, something that would explain why he thought he could do this, and more importantly, something that could stop him. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land. And somewhere out there, that chain sat across my road, like a line drawn in the sand, a line he thought I wouldn't cross. But he didn't understand one thing. This wasn't just about land, or access, or even the road itself. This was about everything that road represented, and I wasn't about to let someone take that. Without a fight, I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that chain, that sign, that look on his face. It wasn't just anger keeping me awake. It was the realization that this wasn't going to fix itself. There was no simple conversation left to have, no handshake solution waiting around the corner. If I wanted that road back, I was going to have to fight for it, and I needed to do it the right way. By sunrise, I was already in the truck, heading into town. The county records office sat in an older part of town, brick building, faded signage, the kind of place that hadn't changed much in decades. I'd been there before, years ago, helping my father pull up documents when we expanded one of the outer fields. Back then, it felt routine. Today, it felt like walking into a courtroom. Inside, it was quiet. A couple of people at desks, stacks of files, the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I walked up to the counter, gave them my name, and explained what I needed. Property records, deeds, historical maps, anything tied to my land and the one next to it. The woman behind the desk didn't ask many questions, just nodded and pointed me toward a section in the back where older records were stored. "Take your time," she said. I planned to. Hours passed. File after file, map after map. Some of it I recognized immediately. Copies of documents I already had at home. But others, older ones, things I'd never seen before, started filling gaps I didn't even realize were there. Property lines shifting over time. Land parcels being divided, combined, resold. Names I didn't recognize attached to pieces of land that eventually became what I own today. And then, I found something that made me stop. An old survey map, older than anything I had at home. Hand-drawn but detailed. And right there, running through the middle of it, the road. Marked clearly, labeled, not as a boundary, but as an access route. My eyes narrowed as I leaned closer. There was a note written beside it, faded but still readable. Primary agricultural access, unrestricted use. Unrestricted, not shared, not divided. Unrestricted. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Because if this map held up, then whatever claim they were making wasn't as solid as they thought. I made copies of everything. Every map, every note, every document that even mentioned that road. By the time I left, I had a thick folder under my arm, and more questions than answers, because one thing still didn't make sense. If this was all there, if these records existed, then how were they so confident? They had to be working off something newer, something that either ignored this or would try to override it, and I needed someone who understood that better than I did. By early afternoon, I was sitting across from a lawyer, not some big city firm, just a local guy who'd handled land disputes, agricultural cases, things like this. The kind of person who knew how these situations played out around here. He didn't say much at first, just listened, flipped through the documents I brought, took his time, which, honestly, made me more anxious than if he just said something right away. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said slowly, "this isn't as simple as they're making it seem." "That's what I thought," I replied. He nodded. "You've got a strong case here," he continued, tapping one of the older maps. "Especially with this. Historical access like that, it carries weight." "So the road's mine," I said. He held up a hand. "Careful," he said. "It's not always about ownership. Sometimes it's about rights, easements, usage. I frowned slightly. What's the difference? The difference, he said, is that even if part of that road technically crosses into their property, they may not have the right to block it. That hit me differently, because it meant something important. Even if their survey showed the road cutting into their land, that didn't automatically mean they could take it. They can't just put up a chain, I said. Not if you have established access rights, he replied. And do I? He looked back down at the documents. With what you've got here, it's looking that way. For the first time since this started, I felt like I could breathe a little, but it didn't last long. Here's the problem, he added. Of course there was one. They're not acting like they're unsure, he continued. People don't usually make moves like this unless they think they're covered. So what are they using? I asked. That's what we need to find out. I nodded slowly, because that was the missing piece. The thing that didn't fit. They weren't guessing. They were pushing. Hard. And people don't push like that unless they believe they've already won. By the time I got back home, the sun was starting to drop again. And the first thing I saw was more change. The fence line had extended. Further than before. More posts. More structure. More of my road boxed in. And just to make sure the message was clear, they'd added something new. Cameras. Small, mounted near the posts, angled directly at the road. Watching. Recording. Like they were expecting something. Or someone. I stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The fence. The chain. The cameras. This wasn't just about blocking access anymore. This was pressure. Intimidation. A way of saying, we're not backing down. I exhaled slowly. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. And it definitely wasn't going to stay calm. But I also knew something else now. Something they clearly didn't expect. They didn't have full control. Not yet. Not legally. And that meant this fight, it wasn't over. It was just getting started. I turned back toward the house, already planning my next move. Because if they thought putting up a fence and a chain was enough to end this, they were about to learn something. Something my father tried to teach me years ago. You don't protect land by standing still. You protect it by knowing exactly what you're standing on. And I was getting closer to that answer with every step. But I still had one question left. What exactly were they hiding behind? And how long before it came crashing down? That night, I didn't spread the papers across the table. I organized them. Stacked. Labeled. Lined up in a way that actually made sense. Because up until now, I'd been reacting, digging, searching, trying to keep up with whatever move they made next. But this was different. Now I had direction. And if I was right, they had just made the biggest mistake of this entire fight. I started with the oldest documents first. The hand-drawn survey. The agricultural notes. The records that clearly marked the road as primary access. I'd already looked at them, but this time I wasn't just reading, I was connecting. Dates. Names. Property transfers. One by one, I followed the history of that land. Mine, and there's like a trail. And that's when something clicked. The neighbor's property hadn't always been what it was now. Decades ago, it was part of a larger parcel, split off and sold separately long after the road had already been established. Which meant one thing. That road existed before their land did. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers. If that was true, then any claim they had came after the fact. After the road. After its use had already been established. And that changed everything. I grabbed another document, the newer survey they were probably relying on. Clean lines. Digital markings. Clear boundaries drawn with precision. And there it was. The problem. The survey showed the road cutting slightly into their property line. Not by much, but enough. Enough for someone to look at it and think they had a claim. Enough for someone like them to act on it. But what the survey didn't show, what it completely ignored, was the history, the usage, the fact that the road wasn't just dirt on land. It was access, legal access, protected access. I felt a slow, steady smile form, because now I understood. They weren't lying. They were incomplete. They were looking at a snapshot, while I had the entire timeline. And timelines matter, especially when they prove something has been in use longer than anyone can reasonably challenge. I didn't wait. The next morning, I was back at the lawyer's office. This time, I didn't explain. I just laid everything out in front of him. Every document, every note, Every connection I'd made the night before. He didn't say anything at first. Just started going through it all again. Slower this time, more focused. Minutes passed. Then he stopped, tapped one of the older records, looked up at me. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "County office," I said. He nodded slowly. "This changes things." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. "Your road," he continued, "isn't just access. It's established access. Long-term, documented, uninterrupted use." That's what I thought. And more importantly, he added, flipping to another page, their property came after. Which means, legally speaking, they bought that land with the road already in place. I leaned forward slightly. "So they knew. Or they should have," he said. That was even better. Because in cases like this, should have known mattered almost as much as actually knowing. "They can't block it," I said. "No," he replied. "They can't." The words hit differently this time. Not hope, not possibility, certainty. "They've overstepped," he continued. "And not in a small way. Blocking established access like this, that opens them up to some serious problems." I nodded slowly, because now, this wasn't just about getting the road back. It was about what came next. "What do we do?" I asked. He closed the folder, and for the first time since I walked in, he smiled. "We stop reacting," he said, "and we start applying pressure." That word stuck with me. Pressure. Because that's exactly what they've been doing to me since this started. Now it was my turn, but not the way they expected. "We don't go out there and argue," he continued. "We don't touch the fence. We don't touch the chain." "Then what?" "We document," he said. "Everything. Every obstruction. Every day that road is blocked. Every impact it has on your operation." I nodded. I'd already started doing that without realizing it. "And then," he added, "we file." I raised an eyebrow. "File what?" "A formal complaint," he said. "Access obstruction. Interference with agricultural operations. Potential damages." Damages. That word carried weight. Real weight. "Once that's in motion," he continued, "they're not just dealing with you anymore. They're dealing with the system." And suddenly, everything shifted. Because up until now, it had felt like a personal fight. Me versus them. But this pulled something bigger into it. Something they couldn't just smile their way through. "Do it," I said. He nodded. I already started drafting it. Of course he had. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole thing began. Control. Not complete. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know I wasn't on the defensive anymore. By the time I got back to the farm, I didn't go straight to the house. I went to the road. The chain was still there. The sign still standing. The cameras still watching. But this time, I didn't feel blocked. I walked up to the edge of that chain and just stood there for a moment. Not angry. Not frustrated. Just calm. Because now I knew something they didn't. They thought they were winning. They thought they had the upper hand. But they didn't realize they had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The chain. The lock. The sign. The fence. Every detail. Every angle. Then I stepped back, looked down the length of that road one more time, and turned away. Not because I was done, but because I was done playing their game. From this point on, we were playing mine. And the best part? They didn't even know it yet. But they were about to. Because somewhere between those old records, that survey they trusted too much, and the move they thought would end this, they had made a mistake. A big one. And now, it was just a matter of time before it caught up to them. At first, nothing happened. No calls. No letters. No sudden knock on the door from anyone official. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought the complaint hadn't even gone through. But that's the thing about pressure. The real kind? You don't always see it right away. You feel it. And a few days in, I started to notice the shift. It began with the workers. They were still coming in every morning, still working along that fence line. But something about them felt different. Slower. Less certain. Like they were waiting for instructions that hadn't come yet. Before, they moved like everything was already settled. Now, they kept looking toward the house. Toward him. Like they were checking if they were still allowed to be there. I didn't say anything. Didn't approach. Didn't even make eye contact. I just went about my routine, what little of it I could manage without full access to the road. Because that was the other thing. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was affecting everything. Deliveries had to be rerouted through a rough back path that barely held up under the weight of my equipment. It cost more, took longer, and every day that chain stayed up, it chipped away at time, money, and patience, which was exactly what they wanted, or at least what they thought would break me. But now it was working against them too. By the end of the week, the first sign showed up. Not on my property, on theirs. A white truck pulled up late morning. Nothing flashy, just a county vehicle with markings you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. Two men stepped out, clipped, professional movements, clipboards in hand. They didn't come near me. Didn't need to. They went straight to the neighbor's side. I watched from a distance as they walked along the fence line, stopping at certain points, taking notes, pointing at things. One of them crouched near the base of a post. Another looked up toward the cameras. Then they moved toward the house. It didn't take long before the front door opened. And for the first time since this started, I saw something different on my neighbor's face. Not confidence, not calm, tension. He spoke with them for a while, longer than I expected. Hands moving more than usual. Voice rising slightly at one point before he caught himself. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I didn't need to, because I knew exactly why they were there. The complaint had landed, and now it was doing its job. That same afternoon, the workers left early. No explanation, no finishing touches, just packed up and gone before the sun even started dropping. The next day, they didn't show up at all. That's when things started to crack. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in small details, the kind most people wouldn't notice. The chain was still there, but the lock had been changed. New, stronger, like they suddenly felt the need to reinforce it. The cameras? More of them. 2 extra added overnight, angled differently, covering more ground. Watching more closely. And the neighbor? He stopped pretending I wasn't there. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel it. His eyes, watching from across the property line. Not openly, not directly, but enough. Enough to know he was paying attention now, because something had shifted, and he felt it. 3 days later, the second hit came. This time, it wasn't just a visit. It was paperwork. I saw it happen. Another vehicle, another official. This one stayed longer. Walked the entire length of that fence. Took photos, measured distances, wrote things down with a level of detail that didn't look optional. When he left, he handed something over. A document. I couldn't see what was on it from where I stood, but I didn't need to, because the reaction said everything. My neighbor didn't argue this time. Didn't smile. Didn't shrug it off like before. He just stood there reading, again and again, like he was trying to find something that wasn't there. An out, an explanation, a mistake. But whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it. That evening, something happened that hadn't happened once since this all started. He came to me. No SUV this time. No distance. He walked down to the edge of the road, stopping just short of the chain, and waited until I noticed. I did, but I didn't rush over. Didn't meet him halfway. I took my time. Let him stand there. Let him feel it. Because now, the balance had changed. When I finally got close enough, I stopped on my side. Said nothing. Just looked at him. For a moment, he didn't speak either. And in that silence, I could see it. That confidence? It was gone. Replaced by something else. Pressure. You filed something, he said finally. Not a question. A statement. I nodded once. I did. His jaw tightened slightly. You should have talked to me first. I almost laughed at that. Talk to you, I repeated. I tried that. You put up a chain. He exhaled through his nose, like he was trying to stay calm. This didn't have to escalate. It didn't, I said. But you escalated it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he glanced back toward his property, toward the fence, the posts, the line he had pushed so hard to establish. They're saying there are issues, he said. Yeah, I replied. There are. He looked back at me. And, for the first time, there was no argument ready. No clever response. No confidence. Just silence. Because now he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about everything that came with trying to take it. And that cost? It was starting to show. I think we should revisit this, he said carefully. I held his gaze. For a few seconds, I let the silence sit between us. Then I shook my head. No, I said. Now we let it play out. His expression shifted slightly. Not anger. Not yet. but frustration, because he knew what that meant. This wasn't something he could smooth over with a conversation anymore. This was bigger, and it was already in motion. I turned away before he could say anything else, walked back toward the house without looking over my shoulder, because there was nothing left to say. Not right now. The trap had been set, and it was tightening, slowly, quietly, exactly the way it needed to. And, judging by the look on his face, he was starting to realize it. But by the time he fully understood just how deep he'd stepped into it, it was going to be too late. The first real crack didn't come with shouting. It came with silence. A week passed after that conversation by the chain, and for the first time since this all started, there was no activity on their side. No workers, no trucks, no new posts, just that fence, that chain, and a house that suddenly felt quieter. Too quiet. I kept expecting another move, another push, something aggressive to show they weren't backing down. But nothing came, and that told me more than anything else could have. Because people like him, they don't stop unless they have to. 3 days later, the official notice came through. Not to me, to them. I didn't see the contents right away, but I saw the delivery. Certified mail. Signed for at the door. And I saw the reaction. He opened it outside, probably thinking no one was watching. I was, from the far end of the field, leaning against the fence, just far enough to stay out of sight, but close enough to read everything that mattered. His posture changed as he read. Straight at first, then stiff, then still, completely still, like his body hadn't caught up to what his eyes were seeing. He read it once, then again, then lowered the paper slowly, staring off toward the road, toward the chain. And in that moment, he knew, whatever was in that letter, it wasn't a warning. It was a problem, a real one. That same afternoon, things moved fast. Too fast. A truck pulled in, different from the others. Not construction, not personal, legal. 2 people stepped out, dressed sharper, moving with purpose. No hesitation, no confusion about where they were going. Straight to the house. They stayed inside for over an hour. When they came back out, they weren't relaxed. They weren't smiling. And neither was he. The confidence was gone now, completely, replaced by something heavier. Pressure. The kind that builds behind closed doors when numbers start getting thrown around, when consequences stop being theoretical. That evening, he came back to the road. This time, he didn't wait, didn't stand at a distance. He walked right up to the chain and called out, "Hey." I was already outside, already watching. I walked down, same as before, but slower, because now, there was no rush. When I got close, I stopped again on my side. Same distance, same line between us. But everything else? Different. "We need to talk," he said. I looked at him for a second, then shook my head slightly. "We already did." His jaw tightened. "This has gone too far." I let out a quiet breath. "You blocked my road," I said. "That's where it went too far. That's not what this is about anymore," he snapped. That caught my attention. "Then what is it about?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Because before, he never hesitated. "They're saying we interfered with access," he said carefully. "That we caused operational damage. That there could be penalties." Not could be, I cut in. Will be. He didn't like that. I could see it in his face. The shift from frustration to something closer to desperation. "This doesn't have to keep going," he said. "We can fix this." I almost smiled. Because that line, that exact line, it came way too late. "You already had that chance," I replied. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because now he understood something I'd known for days. This wasn't about fixing it anymore. It was about consequences. "They're talking about fines," he said, his voice lower now. "Daily fines. And something about removal orders." I nodded once. "Yeah." He looked back toward the fence again. The posts. The line he built so confidently. Then back at me. "What do you want?" he asked. That question hung in the air. Not aggressive. Not arrogant. Just direct. And for the first time since this all started, he wasn't asking like he had control. He was asking because he didn't. I stepped a little closer to the chain. Not touching it. Just enough to make my point clear. "I want my row back," I said. "You'll get it," he replied quickly. "We can take this down today." I shook my head. "Not just that." His brow tightened. "What else?" I held his gaze. "Everything that came with it," I said. "The time, The cost, the damage. His expression shifted again, because now we were talking about something real, something measurable, something expensive. That's not necessary, he said. It is now. Another pause, longer this time, because he was doing the math, running numbers in his head, trying to figure out how bad this could get. And judging by the look on his face, he was starting to realize it was worse than he thought. They said if this goes further, he started, then stopped. I didn't help him, didn't ask, just waited. We could lose more than this, he finished quietly. There it was. The truth. Not just the road. Not just the fence. More. A lot more. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. You could. He looked at me for a long moment. Then exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly, like something finally gave way. All right, he said. We'll take it down. I didn't respond. Didn't nod. Didn't agree. Because this wasn't about words anymore. It was about action. The next morning, the chain was gone. Just like that. Cut loose. Pulled down. Thrown aside like it had never meant anything. The sign? Removed. The posts? Still there, but stripped of purpose. And for the first time in weeks, that road was open again. Clear. Unblocked. Mine. I stood at the edge of it for a while, looking down the same stretch of dirt that had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. It looked the same, but it didn't feel the same, because now it meant more. Behind me, I heard movement. I turned slightly. He was there again, but this time, he didn't come closer, didn't say anything, just stood at a distance, watching, and I could tell. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at everything that came from trying to take it, because in the end, that's what broke him. Not the argument, not the confrontation, but the weight of what came after. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Not even close. Because taking Shane down, that was just the beginning of fixing what he'd done. And some things, they don't get fixed that easily. Not when the damage is already done. Not when the system is already involved. And definitely not when the lesson's already been learned. The road was open again, but peace didn't return overnight. It never does. Even without the chain, even without the signs, the land didn't feel exactly the same as it did before all of this started. Something had changed, not just physically, but in the way everything was viewed, measured, protected. I found myself checking the road more often than I used to. Not because I expected another chain, but because I learned how quickly things could shift when you stopped paying attention. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet at first. No workers, no trucks, no activity on their side of the property. Just the house sitting there, fenced in, with no movement except the occasional light turning on or off at night. And him? I saw him less and less. Not hiding, just withdrawn. The kind of quiet that comes after realizing a situation didn't go the way you planned. Meanwhile, my own routine started to stabilize again. Deliveries came through the road like they used to. Equipment moved without detours. Fields were accessible without extra effort or cost. It didn't happen all at once. But step by step, things returned to normal. And with that normalcy came something else. Perspective. Because while the physical blockage was gone, the consequences of the entire situation were still unfolding behind the scenes. The legal side didn't just disappear when the chain came down. It had already been set in motion. I didn't hear every detail, but I didn't need to. The notices had done their job. The complaints had been processed. The inspections had been completed. And the findings weren't in their favor. By the end of the second week, I noticed activity on their property again, but not construction. Not expansion. Removal. Sections of fencing along certain areas were being taken down. Not all of it, but enough to suggest adjustments were being made. Corrections, whether voluntary or required. I couldn't say for sure, but the message was clear. Things weren't going back to how they wanted. A few days later, I saw a moving truck. Not a big one, not dramatic, just enough to matter. Boxes being carried out. Items loaded. Quiet, controlled movement. No chaos, no urgency, but also no permanence. It didn't take long to understand what that meant. They were leaving, or at least scaling back. And that realization hit differently than anything else that had happened during this entire conflict. Because the fight wasn't just about the road anymore. It had consequences that reached far beyond it. That evening, I stood at the edge of the road again. Same spot I'd stood countless times over the past weeks. Only this time, there was no chain in front of me. No sign, no barrier, just open ground. And for the first time since this started, silence that felt right. Not tense, not uncertain, just settled. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew who it was. He stopped a few feet away, not close enough to feel confrontational, not far enough to ignore. "You got what you wanted," he said. I turned slightly to face him. "I got my road back," I replied. He nodded slowly, then looked down the length of it. "You knew more than you let on," he said. I didn't deny it. "I knew enough," I said. He gave a small, almost tired exhale. "Yeah," he muttered. "I can see that now." We stood there in silence for a moment. Not hostile, not friendly, just two people who had gone through something neither of them expected. "I should have handled this differently," he said finally. I looked at him. Maybe that was the closest thing to an admission I was going to get. "Yeah," I replied simply. Another pause. He nodded again, then shifted his weight slightly like he was about to leave. Before he turned, he added one more thing. "Didn't think farmers would push back like that." That almost made me smile. "Most don't," I said. He looked at me, waiting, so I finished the thought. "But that doesn't mean they won't when it matters." He gave a slight nod. No argument, no comeback, just acceptance. Then he turned and walked back toward his property. And that was it. No final confrontation, no dramatic apology, no dramatic ending between us. Just the end of a situation that had run its course. Over the next few weeks, life settled into something close to normal again. The road remained open. The fields were fully operational. And the pressure that had built up during those weeks slowly faded into memory. But not completely, because something stayed with me. Not the conflict itself, but what it revealed. About assumptions, about confidence, about what people believe they can take when they think no one will stand in their way. My father's words came back to me more clearly than ever. Protect what's yours, because people will try to take it. At the time, I thought he meant guarding land, watching boundaries, keeping records, but I understand it differently now. Protecting what's yours isn't just about ownership. It's about awareness, about knowing your rights, knowing your history, and being ready to stand your ground when someone tests it. Because people will test it, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, and sometimes all at once. I walked down the road one final time that evening, stopping at the midpoint where everything had once been blocked. I looked back toward the house, then forward toward the fields. And for the first time in a long while, everything was exactly as it should be. No signs, no chains, no tension, just land, and the road that connected it all. I took a slow breath and started walking forward again. Not because I had somewhere urgent to be, but because I could. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. Because in the end, they didn't just learn about the road. They learned something far more important. You never mess with farmers who know exactly what they own and exactly how to defend it.